She climbed over him, looked him straight in the eye, and said the 5 words that would save his life. "You're not escaping tonight." Jake stared at his computer screen until his eyes felt like sandpaper. The numbers on the clock read 3:47 a.m., but time had lost all meaning 3 days ago. His small apartment looked like a tornado had hit it. Empty pizza boxes were stacked on the kitchen counter like a leaning tower. Energy drink cans formed a small army around his workspace. Charging cables snaked across the floor like electronic vines. He was a software developer, and this project was supposed to be his big break. The client was paying good money, and Jake needed every penny. His rent was already 2 weeks late, and his credit card was maxed out from buying groceries and keeping the lights on. But more than the money, this project meant proving himself. He was tired of being seen as just another programmer who couldn't handle the big leagues. The deadline was tomorrow, and he still had bugs to fix. Every time he thought he was done, another problem would pop up like a stubborn weed. His fingers moved automatically across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over where his brain had given up hours ago. Coffee had stopped working sometime yesterday. Now he was running purely on stress and determination. His phone buzzed constantly on the table next to him, but he ignored it. Probably just spam calls or his sister checking in again. She meant well, but he didn't have time for family drama right now. Everyone would understand once he landed this contract and got his life back on track. Jake rubbed his burning eyes and tried to focus on the code in front of him. The letters seemed to dance and blur together. He blinked hard, shook his head, and tried again. Just a few more hours, he told himself. Just push through until morning, submit the project, and then he could finally sleep. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that his last meal had been a granola bar around noon yesterday. Or was it the day before? The days had started blending, together like watercolors in the rain. He glanced at the empty takeout containers scattered around his desk. Maybe he should eat something, but that would mean stopping work, and stopping meant falling behind. The apartment felt smaller every hour. The walls seemed to press closer, and the air felt thick and stale. He hadn't opened a window in days, hadn't even thought about fresh air. The outside world had become something that existed beyond his small bubble of work and worry. His neighbors probably thought he had moved out or disappeared entirely. His back ached from hunching over the laptop for so long. The cheap desk chair he had bought from a thrift store was never meant for marathon coding sessions, but getting up to stretch felt like admitting defeat, like breaking the spell that kept him focused on the screen. He had convinced himself that movement would somehow reset his progress and force him to start over. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion finally won the battle. Jake's eyelids felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. The screen became fuzzy, and his head started nodding forward like a broken toy. He fought it for another few minutes, typing random letters that made no sense before finally giving in to the inevitable. He didn't even make it to his bed. The small couch in his living room was closer, and Jake collapsed onto it like a tree, falling in the forest. His laptop stayed balanced on his chest, still warm from running programs all night. The screen's blue light painted strange shadows on his face as his breathing slowed and deepened. In his rush to keep working, Jake had forgotten to do something he normally did every night without thinking. The front door was still unlocked. The chain wasn't even on. Anyone could walk right in, but in his exhausted state, home security was the last thing on his mind. All that mattered was the project, the deadline, and catching just a few hours of sleep before diving back into the endless cycle of code and coffee. Meanwhile, across town, his college friend Lisa sat in her car outside a 24-hour diner, staring at her phone. She had been texting Jake for 3 weeks straight, trying to get him to meet her for coffee. Every message went unanswered. Every call went straight to voicemail. At first, she thought he was just busy with work, but this was getting ridiculous. Lisa and Jake had been study partners in college, spending countless nights in the library helping each other through difficult programming courses. They had always been there for each other through failed exams, bad breakups, and family problems. But lately, Jake had become a ghost, disappearing from their friend group and avoiding all social contact. She remembered the last time they had talked, about 2 months ago. Jake had seemed stressed and distracted, complaining about money problems and work pressure. She had offered to help, to listen, or just to hang out and watch movies like they used to. But Jake had brushed off her concerns with a forced smile and promises to call her soon. Those calls never came. Lisa looked at her phone again, reading through their text conversation. Her messages filled the screen like a one-sided conversation with herself. Jake's last response was from 3 weeks. Ego, just 2 words, sorry, busy. Since then, nothing but silence. She had tried calling their mutual friends, but nobody had heard from Jake either. He had missed game night, skipped birthday parties, and hadn't shown up to their monthly group dinner in over 2 months. Everyone was starting to worry, but nobody knew what to do about it. Lisa drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, making a decision that would change everything. She remembered that Jake used to hide a spare key under the fake rock by his apartment entrance. It was a running joke between them because the fake rock looked so obviously fake that it defeated the purpose entirely. Tomorrow, she decided, she was going to stop waiting for Jake to respond. She was going to take matters into her own hands and figure out what was really going on with her friend. If he wouldn't come to coffee, then coffee would come to him. Lisa stood outside Jake's apartment building at 7 a.m., holding 2 coffee cups and a bag of fresh pastries from the bakery down the street. She had been awake all night thinking about her plan, going over every possible scenario in her head. Part of her felt guilty about what she was about to do, but a bigger part of her was genuinely worried about her friend. The fake rock was exactly where she remembered it, sitting by the entrance looking ridiculously obvious among the real stones. She shook her head and smiled despite her concern. Some things never changed. Jake had always been brilliant with computers but hopeless with practical security measures. The key was still there, slightly rusty but functional. Lisa took a deep breath, climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor and stood outside apartment 2B. She could hear the faint hum of electronics through the thin door. At least he was alive in there. She knocked first, waiting a full minute for any response. Nothing. She knocked louder, calling out his name. Still nothing but silence. That settled it. Lisa slipped the key into the lock and slowly opened the door. The smell hit her first. Stale air mixed with old food and the sharp scent of electronic equipment that had been running too long. The apartment looked like a disaster zone. It was worse than anything she had imagined during her sleepless night of worry. Pizza boxes were stacked everywhere like cardboard monuments. Empty energy drink cans covered every surface, some still sticky with dried liquid. Clothes were scattered across the floor like someone had exploded a laundry basket. The small kitchen sink was filled with dishes that looked like they had been there for weeks. But what really shocked her was Jake himself. He was passed out on the couch, looking nothing like the friend she remembered. His hair was greasy and messy. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look like he had been in a fight. His laptop was still balanced on his chest, the screen showing lines of code that made no sense to her. Lisa set down the coffee and pastries on the only clean spot she could find on the coffee table. She looked around the small apartment, trying to figure out the best way to handle this situation. Jake was sprawled across the entire length of the small couch, one arm hanging off the side, completely blocking any normal way to sit down. This was not how she had planned this conversation to go. In her mind, she had imagined Jake answering. The door may be looking a little tired, but basically okay. They would sit down like civilized people and talk through whatever was going on. But this was different. This was serious. Lisa made a decision that surprised even herself. If Jake wanted to sleep on the couch, fine, but she was not leaving without having this conversation. She carefully stepped over his legs and positioned herself on the narrow space at the end of the couch, essentially trapping him between her and the back cushions. It was awkward and probably not the most polite way to wake someone up, but desperate times called for creative solutions. She had driven across town at dawn, brought coffee and food, and used her emergency key because she was genuinely worried about him. The least he could do was have an honest conversation with her. Jake stirred slightly as the couch shifted under her weight. His laptop slid sideways, and Lisa caught it before it could fall to the floor. The screen was filled with programming, code that looked like a foreign language, but she could see error messages flashing in angry red text. She waited, watching Jake's face as consciousness slowly returned. His eyes fluttered open, looking confused and disoriented. For a moment he just stared at the ceiling, probably trying to figure out where he was and what time it was. Then he noticed her. Jake's eyes went wide with shock and panic. He tried to sit up quickly, but Lisa was positioned in a way that made escape impossible without being incredibly rude. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly trying to process what was happening. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Lisa said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Before you ask, yes, I used your spare key. And before you try to run away or make excuses, I need you to know that you're not escaping tonight." The words came out more dramatically than she had planned, but they felt right. Jake needed to understand that this was not a casual social visit. This was an intervention, and she was not backing down. Jake blinked several times, still looking like he was trying to wake up from a strange dream. "Lisa, what are you doing here? What time is it?" "It's 7 in the morning, and I'm here because you've been ignoring me for 3 weeks, she replied, crossing her arms. "Actually, you've been ignoring everyone for months. When was the last time you left this apartment?" Jake tried to shift position, but there was nowhere to go. The couch was too small, and Lisa had effectively cornered him. "I've been working. I have a deadline today. I can't just stop everything to chat." "Chat?" Lisa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jake, look around. Really look at this place. When did you last eat a real meal? When did you last shower? When did you last talk to another human being?" Jake glanced around his apartment as if seeing it for the first time. His face went pale as he took in the mess, the smell, the chaos that had become his normal environment. "It's not that bad. I've just been focused on this project." "Not that bad?" Lisa gestured at the tower of pizza boxes. "There's mold growing on those containers over there. Your sink is full of dishes from last month, and you look like you haven't slept properly in weeks." The reality of the situation was starting to sink in for both of them. What had started as Lisa's plan to have a friendly conversation had turned into something much more serious. She could see the shame and embarrassment creeping into Jake's expression as he realized how far things had gone. Jake's face crumbled as he looked around his apartment with fresh eyes. The shame hit him like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He had been so deep in his work bubble that he hadn't realized how bad things had gotten. Seeing it through, Lisa's eyes made everything crystal clear, and it was horrifying. "I didn't mean for it to get like this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It just happened slowly, you know. One late night became 2, then a week. Then I lost track of everything else." Lisa's expression softened slightly, but she didn't move from her position. She had come here for answers, and she was going to get them. "Jake, this isn't just about being messy or working too hard. I've been texting you for weeks. We had plans to meet for coffee 3 separate times, and you just disappeared. That's not like you at all." Jake ran his hands through his greasy hair, avoiding her eyes. "I know. I kept meaning to text you back, but then I'd get distracted by work, and before I knew it, days had passed. I thought I could handle everything on my own." "Handle what exactly?" Lisa pressed. "What's really going on here? And don't tell me it's just work stress, because I've seen you stressed before. This is something else entirely." For a long moment, Jake was quiet. Lisa could practically see the internal battle happening behind his eyes. He was trying to decide whether to keep pretending everything was fine, or to finally tell someone the truth that had been eating him alive for months. Finally, the dam broke. "I've been having panic attacks," Jake said quietly, the words tumbling out like he was afraid he'd lose his courage if he stopped. "Real ones, where I can't breathe and my heart feels like it's going to explode and I think I'm dying. They started about 6 months ago, just small ones at first, but they got worse." Lisa listened without interrupting, her face showing concern but not judgment. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, but hearing it confirmed still made her stomach drop. "The work thing is real too," Jake continued, his words coming faster now. "This project could change everything for me financially, but every time I try to work on it, I start panicking about messing it up. So I work longer hours to make sure it's perfect, But then I get more anxious about the deadline, which makes me work even longer hours. It's like being trapped in a hamster wheel that keeps spinning faster. When was the last time you left this apartment? Lisa asked gently. Jake thought for a moment, and his face went pale. I honestly don't remember. Maybe 2 weeks ago to get groceries? But I've been getting everything delivered since then because leaving feels too overwhelming. Lisa felt her heart break a little. This was so much worse than she had imagined. Jake wasn't just being antisocial or rude by ignoring his friends. He was trapped in his own anxiety and didn't know how to ask for help. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked. You know we all care about you. I would have helped. Any of us would have helped. Jake's eyes filled with tears, and he wiped them away quickly with the back of his hand. Because I felt like such a failure. Here I am, a grown man, who can't even handle basic life stuff. I can write complex computer programs, but I can't manage to do laundry or return a text message. How pathetic is that? It's not pathetic, it's human, Lisa said firmly. Mental health struggles don't make you weak or broken. They just make you someone who needs support, like everyone else does at different times in their lives. Jake looked at her with surprise, as if he had never considered that possibility before. But you have your life together. You have a good job, a nice apartment, friends. You don't fall apart like this. Lisa laughed, but it was a sad sound. Jake, do you remember sophomore year when I basically lived in the library for 3 months? Straight? When I was so depressed I could barely get out of bed, let alone go to classes. Jake nodded slowly. He did remember that time, though he had never fully understood what Lisa was going through back then. You used to bring me coffee and sit with me while I studied, even when I was being completely antisocial and grumpy. Lisa continued. You never made me feel bad about struggling. You just showed up day after day until I started feeling human. Again, do you remember what you told me back then? Not really, Jake admitted. You said that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone help you. You said that asking for support isn't giving up, it's fighting back. Lisa smiled at the memory. I never forgot that, and it's part of why I'm here today. You saved me back then, and now it's my turn to return the favor. Jake stared at her, processing this revelation. He had been so caught up in his own shame and fear that he had forgotten about their history together. Lisa understood what he was going through because she had been there herself. I don't know how to get out of this, Jake said quietly. Every day feels impossible. I wake up already exhausted, and the simplest tasks feel like climbing mountains. I can't even imagine having the energy to clean this place up, let alone fix my entire life. You don't have to fix everything at once, Lisa replied. But you also can't keep living like this. It's not sustainable and it's not healthy. You're going to make yourself seriously sick if you continue down this path. Jake looked around his apartment again, really seeing it this time. The mess, the smell, the evidence of months of neglect and isolation. He saw how far he had fallen from the person he used to be, and it scared him. What if I can't change? He asked, voicing his deepest fear. What if this is just who I am now? What if I'm too far gone to get better? Lisa reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Then we'll figure it out together. But I promise you, Jake, you are not too far gone. You're still the same person who helped me through my darkest time. You're still the friend who cares about people and solves problems and makes terrible jokes that somehow manage to be funny anyway. For the first time in months, Jake felt a tiny spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe he wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe there was a way out of this dark hole he had dug for himself. But even as that hope flickered to life, the practical part of his brain started listing all the reasons why change was impossible. The project deadline, the money problems, the overwhelming mess of his life that seemed too big to tackle. Lisa seemed to read his thoughts. I can see you getting scared again. That's okay. But remember what I said earlier. You're not escaping tonight. We're going to sit here and make a plan, and I'm not leaving until we do. Lisa looked around the apartment with the calculating eyes of someone ready to tackle a huge project. She had seen Jake at his worst, heard his confession about the panic attacks, and now it was time to move from talking to action. But she knew that overwhelming him with too many changes at once would only make things worse. Okay, she said, clapping her hands together. First things first. We need to make a list of what absolutely has to happen today, this week, and this month. But we're going to start small because trying to fix everything at once is just going to stress you out more. Jake nodded, though he still looked overwhelmed by the enormity of his situation. The project deadline is today at 5 p.m. If I don't submit it, I lose the contract and all the money. That has to be the priority. Fine, but you can't work effectively in this environment, Lisa said, gesturing at the chaos around them. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to help you clean up just enough space for you to think clearly. Then you're going to finish your project while I handle some of the other stuff. Deal? Jake looked skeptical. You don't have to clean up my mess. This is embarrassing enough already. Jake, look at me, Lisa said firmly. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help you get back on your feet. Sometimes that means doing things that feel uncomfortable or embarrassing, but that's what friends do for each other. She stood up from the couch and rolled up her sleeves. Besides, you helped me organize my entire dorm room junior year when I was too depressed to function. Remember? You spent an entire weekend sorting through my stuff and never once made me feel bad about it. The memory made Jake smile slightly. He did remember that weekend. Lisa had been going through a rough breakup and had let everything pile up until her room was uninhabitable. Jake had shown up with cleaning supplies and snacks, and they had worked together until the space felt livable again. All right, Jake said, finally getting up from the couch. But I'm helping. This is my mess and I need to take responsibility for it. They started with the most urgent task, clearing a workspace where Jake could finish his project. Lisa gathered up the empty pizza boxes while Jake collected all the energy drink cans. The sound of aluminum clanking together was almost musical as they filled 2 large trash bags. When did you last eat real food? Lisa asked as she wiped down the desk with disinfectant wipes she had found under the kitchen sink. Jake paused, trying to remember. I had some ramen noodles yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. Time gets weird when you don't sleep much. Lisa shook her head and pulled out her phone. I'm ordering us some real breakfast, and before you say you can't afford it, this one's on me. You can't code on an empty stomach. While they waited for the food delivery, they tackled the dishes. The sink was so full that water couldn't even run properly. Jake looked at the mountain of plates and cups with despair, but Lisa just handed him a pair of rubber gloves and started filling the sink with hot, soapy water. This is going to take forever, Jake said, but he started washing anyway. Maybe, but we don't have to do it all today, Lisa replied, drying dishes and putting them away. The goal is progress, not perfection. You've been living in survival mode for months. It's going to take time to get back to normal. As they worked, Lisa started asking Jake about his daily routine, or what passed for routine in his current state. She learned that he had been surviving on maybe 3 hours of sleep per night, eating mostly junk food, and hadn't spoken to another person face-to-face in over 2 weeks. We need to set up some basic structure, Lisa said. Nothing fancy, just simple things that will help you feel more human, like eating at least 1 real meal per day and talking to at least 1 person who isn't a delivery driver. Jake laughed despite himself. You make it sound so easy. It's not easy, but it's doable, Lisa corrected. The hard part is starting. Once you get momentum going, it gets easier to keep moving forward. The food arrived just as they finished, clearing the main living area. Jake realized he was actually hungry, not just running on caffeine and adrenaline for the first time in days. They sat on the now clean couch and ate fresh bagels with cream cheese and real fruit. This tastes incredible, Jake said, savoring flavors he had forgotten existed. I didn't realize how terrible I felt until I started feeling better. That's how it works with depression and anxiety, Lisa explained. You adapt to feeling awful and it becomes your new normal. But your body and mind remember what good feels like once you give them a chance. After breakfast, Jake sat down at his newly organized desk and opened his laptop. The project that had seemed impossible just hours earlier now felt manageable. His mind was clearer, his workspace was functional, and he had someone nearby who believed in him. Lisa settled into the clean living area with her own laptop, working on her own projects while staying close enough to provide moral support. Every hour or so she would check in with Jake, bringing him water or a healthy snack, making sure he took short breaks to stretch and breathe. "You know what's weird?" Jake said during one of these breaks. "I actually feel like I can finish this project now. This morning I was sure I was going to fail, but having you here makes everything seem possible." "That's not weird at all," Lisa replied. "Isolation makes everything harder. When you're alone with your problems, they seem huge and unsolvable. But when you have support, even the same problems become manageable." As Jake worked, Lisa made phone calls to their other friends, letting them know that Jake was going through a rough time but was getting help. She was careful not to share personal details, but she wanted their support network to be ready when Jake was ready to reconnect. By 4 p.m., Jake had submitted his project with 20 minutes to spare. The relief on his face was visible as he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "I did it," he said, sounding amazed. "I actually did it. And it's good work too, not just something I threw together at the last minute." "Of course you did," Lisa said with a grin. "You're talented and smart. You just needed the right environment to let those qualities show." But Lisa knew that finishing the project was just the first step. Jake's deeper issues with anxiety and isolation weren't going to disappear overnight. The real work was just beginning, and she was determined to make sure Jake didn't slip back into his old patterns. "So what happens now?" Jake asked, as if reading her thoughts. Lisa pulled out a notebook and pen. "Now we make a real plan for keeping you healthy and connected. And the first rule of this plan is that you don't get to disappear on me again." 3 months later, Jake stood in his apartment getting ready for what had become his favorite night of the week. The same space that had once felt like a prison now felt like home again. The walls were painted a warm blue instead of the dingy white they used to be. Plants sat on the windowsill, their green leaves catching the afternoon sunlight. The air smelled fresh and everything had its proper place. He checked his phone and smiled at the group text that had been going all day. His friends were planning the menu for tonight's dinner party, debating whether to make pizza from scratch or order from their favorite place downtown. These weekly gatherings had started as part of Lisa's master plan to keep Jake connected to people, but they had grown into something special that everyone looked forward to. The doorbell rang, and Jake opened it to find Lisa standing there with 2 grocery bags and a huge grin on her face. "Please tell me you didn't cook anything yet," she said, pushing past him into the kitchen, "because I found this amazing recipe for homemade pasta that I'm dying to try." "Relax," Jake laughed. "I made a salad and cleaned the bathroom. That's the extent of my cooking ambitions for today." Lisa looked around the apartment with obvious satisfaction. It was hard to believe this was the same place she had broken into 3 months earlier. The transformation had been gradual but complete. Gone were the towers of pizza boxes and the army of energy drink cans. In their place were bookshelves, comfortable furniture, and photos of friends and family. But the biggest change wasn't in the apartment. It was in Jake himself. He looked healthy again. His hair was clean and styled. His clothes fit properly and matched each other, and most importantly, his eyes looked bright and alert instead of the exhausted, panicked look they used to have. He moved with confidence instead of the nervous energy that used to consume him. "I still can't believe you're the same person who was passed out on that couch surrounded by garbage," Lisa said, as they started preparing dinner together. "Some days I can't believe it either," Jake admitted. "But then I remember that I'm not the same person. I had to learn how to be different." The therapy had been the hardest part, but also the most important. Lisa had made the appointment for Jake during that first week when he was still too overwhelmed to make phone calls himself. At first, he had resented having to talk to a stranger about his problems, but gradually, he began to understand that his anxiety and depression weren't character flaws or signs of weakness. They were medical conditions that could be treated and managed. Learning to recognize his panic attacks before they spiraled out of control had been a game changer. His therapist had taught him breathing techniques and coping strategies that actually worked. More importantly, she had helped him understand that asking for help wasn't giving up. It was taking control of his life in a healthy way. The work situation had improved dramatically too. After successfully completing that first project, Jake had been offered more contracts from the same client, but instead of taking on everything at once like he used to, He had learned to set boundaries. He worked normal hours, took weekends off, and never again let a deadline consume his entire life. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" Jake asked as he chopped vegetables for the salad. "When you climbed over me on the couch and said I wasn't escaping?" Lisa grinned. "I was pretty dramatic, wasn't I? I had been rehearsing that line in my car for like 20 minutes before I came upstairs." "Well, it worked," Jake said. "Because you were right. I wasn't going to escape. Not from the conversation, not from my problems, and definitely not from having people who care about me in my life." The other friends started arriving around 6 o'clock. Tom brought his famous garlic bread, while Amy showed up with a homemade chocolate cake that looked almost too beautiful to eat. David carried in a case of beer and immediately started complaining about traffic, which made everyone laugh because David complained about traffic every single week. As they gathered around Jake's dining table, sharing food and stories from their week, Lisa watched Jake interact with everyone. He was fully present in a way that he hadn't been for years, not just the months when he was struggling with anxiety. He asked questions, told jokes, and genuinely seemed to enjoy being surrounded by his friends. "Okay, confession time," Amy said, as they finished eating. "We were all worried about you for way longer than just those few months when you disappeared. You had been pulling away from us gradually for like a year before Lisa staged her intervention." "Really?" Jake looked surprised. "I had no idea it was that obvious." "It wasn't obvious that you were having panic attacks," Tom clarified. "But it was obvious that you weren't happy. You seemed stressed all the time and you kept making excuses to avoid hanging out with us." Lisa nodded. "That's part of why I was so determined to get through to you. I could see you disappearing a little, more each time we talked, and I was scared that if I waited much longer, you might disappear completely." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I didn't mean to worry everyone. I honestly thought I was hiding it better than that." "Don't apologize," David said firmly. "You were dealing with a medical condition. You wouldn't apologize for having the flu or breaking your leg. Mental health struggles are the same thing. Plus, look at us now," Amy added, gesturing around the table. "We're all closer than we were before. Your crisis brought us together in a way that might not have happened otherwise." After dinner, they moved to the living room to play board games, a tradition that had started during Jake's recovery when he needed low-key activities that didn't require too much energy. As the evening wound down and people started to leave, Lisa lingered behind to help clean up. "I have something to tell you," Jake said as they loaded the dishwasher together. "I got a call yesterday from someone at my old college. They're starting a peer support program for students with anxiety and depression, and they want me to help design it." Lisa looked up with excitement. "Jake, that's amazing. Are you going to do it?" "I think so," Jake said. "It feels like the right way to use everything I learned from this experience. Plus, I remember what it felt like to think I was the only person going through something like this. If I can help other people realize they're not alone, then maybe all of this was worth it." Lisa smiled and gave him a hug. "You know what this means, right? You've gone from being the person who needed rescuing to being the person who's going to do the rescuing." "We both know that's not quite right," Jake said. "I'm going to be the person who helps other people rescue themselves. Just like you helped me realize I could save myself if I was willing to accept support from people who cared about me." As Lisa got ready to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at Jake's apartment one more time. The warm light from the lamps, the plants in the windows, the photos on the walls, it all told the story of a life rebuilt from the ground up. "Hey, Jake," she called out. "Yeah? Next time you're struggling with something, promise me you won't wait 3 months to tell someone about it." Jake laughed and held up his hand like he was taking an oath. "I promise. No more disappearing acts. No more thinking I have to handle everything alone. And definitely no more sleeping on the couch surrounded by pizza boxes." "Good," Lisa said, with a satisfied nod. "Because if I have to break into your apartment again, I'm keeping the spare key." As she walked to her car, Lisa reflected on how much had changed since that morning when she had climbed over Jake on his couch and refused to let him escape from help. Sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was to make it impossible. for them to keep running from the support they needed. And sometimes being a good friend meant being willing to be dramatically inconvenient when the situation called for it.